Hey, what's up, guys? Coach Mac, playfastfootball.blogspot.com. Today I'm going to take a chance to do a blog on a request that I got. And one of the reasons I like doing these is, number one, after about 3.5 years of doing this now, with over 10,000 subscribers and approaching 1,300,000 views on the channel, I have to be thankful for all the people that are out there that actually support the channel and appreciate my take or my opinion on football. So I like doing these request videos when I get a chance to do them, so that I can kind of pay back the people that have supported me and got this channel to be as productive as it's been. And also, you know, with over 120 videos that I've done, sometimes it's hard for me to come up with different topics to talk about. So anytime I can get requests on things that I can talk about, I'm more than glad to do them. So Coach Hale, if you're out there, this one's going to be for you. It's a request on talking about old school 5-2 defense with boxing defensive ends. And I think the first thing that you have to look at, and a good thing to do sometimes, even as a new coach or a young coach in 2017, is you got to go back to study the history and the origins of the game of football and where it was and where it is now and where it came from. And the 5-2 defense is the earliest manifestation of today's 3-4 defense. Now, why is it a 3-4 defense today as opposed to a 5-2 defense years and years ago? And the simple reason for that is the personnel that's on the field. When I talk to new coaches, or I talk to coaches in general all the time, one of the things I tell them about is don't let the nomenclature of defenses fool you into thinking that it's a certain structure or certain fronts that have to be played. The nomenclature is simply telling you the personnel that's on the field, and then the personnel is going to dictate how you do certain things and why you do certain things. So a 5-2 defense is the earliest manifestation of the 3-4 defense, and it's very similar in a lot of its structure. The difference is the 5-2 defense played with 5 defensive linemen, usually all of them with their hands in the ground, and there would be 3 interior D linemen and then 2 defensive ends. And a 3-4 defense would play with 3 interior linemen, 4 linebackers, as opposed to 5 D linemen, 2 linebackers, and then 4 secondary players behind it. All right, both of these systems can get into the same fronts. Whether or not they can play the same coverages and things they can do in coverage structures is different, because they have, the 3-4 has linebackers that can drop into different areas as opposed to defensive ends that are not going to drop. So the 5-2 is the earliest manifestation of the 3-4 defense. And really, in essence, what you have to look at is the 5-2 defense, even with boxing ends or spilling ends. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the 5-2 defense was basically the evolution of zone pressure. They were sending 5 every down. And at that time, you have to understand that football was played out of a lot more condensed 2- and 3-back formations. And before the day and age of guys like Sid Gilman and Don Coryell and Bill Walsh and, you know, many of the other guys that helped revolutionized the forward passing game, a lot of the routes and the things that they had to defend in the passing game were such that they could void zones out and not have to worry about it in the passing game. They only had to worry about defending certain hardball runs and then certain passing theories. So what they were doing is they were zone blitzing before they knew what zone blitzing was, because a lot of the times they were just voiding out underneath areas because the offense didn't have the ability to formationally or structurally, schematically get enough receivers into the routes to take advantage of the voided out zones. So when you look in terms of boxing defensive ends, what we're talking about is defensive ends that are going to keep all runs inside, okay? And, you know, a couple things that you got to understand with that. These are not going to be players that run straight up the field. They're going to be what's called hard joint players. And a hard joint player is going to be using a technique that is forcing the ball back to the inside by squeezing and taking on the first lead block aggressively with your inside shoulder so that your outside arm is free, so that you're not giving up huge vertical running lanes, but you are making sure that the ball goes inside you. Now, the first thing that we need to discuss is there's nothing wrong with boxing runs as long as everybody on the defense fits runs the same way. So when you use the term, or you hear the term run fits, what that means is the guys that are in the fit of the run itself all have to understand how the run is being fit for that defense to be successful. So if you are a boxing defensive team and you're boxing your defensive ends, then your linebackers and whoever your extra players are need to understand that if those ends are going to box runs, then we need to fall in and support those runs in a certain manner as opposed to how you would support runs in a spill scheme. Okay, so there are still defenses that box today. There are still defenses that spill and box and do both. All right, but the thing is, the good defenses today fit runs based on the scheme that they're playing. Now, Coach Hale wanted me to talk about it from a two-high structure, and really, in theory, what you're getting to is kind of like today's two-trap, four under, two deep zone structure, zone blitz structure, where you're sending five. So if you were in a double eagle look like this, you'd be sending these five, all right, here, all right. If you were two gapping the nose off the backside of the center and then playing the backside linebacker to the front side A gap, you'd really be in some type of five-man pressure with two trap corners, two deep safeties, all right, and then two vertical hook inside droppers is really what you would be in. Okay. Now, in the older 5-2 days, I think what you saw more of was more 5-2 schemes with a strong safety or a rover or a monster, to where you were playing three underneath players and three deep players, all right, because philosophically, schematically speaking, in my opinion, if you're going to box defensive ends, then you're not going to want these corners out here being the guys that are involved in the run. You're going to want more safety support in the run game, because if you're turning all runs back inside and you're playing mostly two-back, three-back condensed formations and the runs are being turned inside, then you really don't need your corners out there doing a lot in the run game if you're going to box runs back to the inside. So you would be in more of a safety support structure. The issue teams had back then was there wasn't a lot of quarters defense or things being played, because you don't have a player to match two to the flat so that the safety can aggressively play two vertical and be in a position to play that quarters robber technique. Okay, so in my opinion, this five-man pressure with two high safeties would have been more of a four under, two deep trap style pressure, or what you probably would have been more likely to see, all right, is you probably would have been more likely to see that monster strong safety type that sat down to the strong side, all right, with the backers inside. So now to that strong side, okay, where the tight end could possibly release, they have a curl flat player, they have a hook curl player, and then to this side they had more of a hook curl player. And really the area that was voided out, all right, was kind of that weak side flat area before teams could really do things to aggressively start attacking the split end and the X. And so what they were in is they were in a system where they were sending five, all right, and then they were in a voided out flat really to the weak side most of the time, because in that time and period, most of the throws, if anybody got out to the flat, it would be the tight end that was doing a lot of things back then. So they had a guy to the strong side to cover that. Okay. Now, as always, behind five-man pressures, you could play man-free, so that was always an option. But in my opinion, behind a lot of these 5-2 defenses, I think you saw more 5-3 structures, where it might have been three linebackers or two linebackers and a third strong safety monster type down there in the box, because now, if you're going to box these defensive ends, now you've got people in position to fit the runs from inside out, okay, because you don't need them wide of the defensive ends fitting runs if you're going to box your defensive ends and turn the ball back inside. Okay, so the 5-2 boxing defense was more of an early manifestation of the 3-4, and it was also because of what they saw at the time. All right, so now when we look in today's game, the thing you got to understand now is when you start to see, all right, you start to see spread type formations. All right, so just for argument's sake, you take 2-by-2 for example. Okay, now when you start to get these 2-by-2 formations, offenses are making you defend the width of the field. All right, so they're making you defend everything and giving you, or trying to get their players in space. All right, so that now when you use this old school 5-2 boxing end defensive theory, now what happens is you have more space to cover. So now you've got guys that have to get out here a little bit wider to defend. All right. Nowadays, what you would get is more 3 under, 3 deep, maybe some pattern match, seam curl flat, number 3 middle hole dropper, all right, here. Because what happened is in the modern passing game, with 5 threats able to go out and all the space that they made you defend, all of a sudden that old 5-2 voided flat scheme really didn't work as well, because teams could just sit back there and with their quick and intermediate passing game, all right, they could pick you apart. They could keep a back in, have 6-on-5 in protection. Even if a back got out, they still have 5 to protect versus 5. It creates one-on-one matchups up front. but they also have a lot of one-on-one matchups out in space. Okay, so if you were to play this style of defense now, which there are some teams that still do it, and when teams pressure, they'll do it. There's nothing wrong, all right? You can play the same style of pressure here and box those ends and turn runs back in. The only difference is you've got guys a little bit wider now that are going to be your immediate help or support players because of the width of the formation. All right, so, you know, to me, in the evolution of football, the width of the formations and things spreading out a little bit wider is what got a lot of people, all right, to start spilling things to where their help is, so now that guys could be a little bit wider so that when you spill things, you're spilling it to help their alignment. All right, you're also spilling things because you want to eliminate vertical running lanes. So a lot of today's good defenses that spill really hard with defensive ends, the reason they spill is because they want to take away the vertical running lanes and make the ball go east and west, and then they want to have their support set up to defend those runs that are going east and west. All right, now another thing that the old 5-2 teams never had to defend was they never saw really QB runs. Okay. Now you had some great athletes back in the day playing quarterback, all right, and you had some really good players that could scramble and keep plays alive and do some you know, if you watch vintage highlights of Fran Tarkington and quarterbacks like that back in the day, they could do a lot of things to keep plays alive, but it was all within the passing game that they would keep plays alive. There was never any structured QB runs. Now what happens is you get structured QB runs, all right, and now the offense ends up with 6 blockers. Even though they're 4 wide, they end up with 6 blockers because now they put themselves in a situation, really, when you want to look at it, all right, essentially that QB becomes a tailback and that offset or that other back becomes a fullback, and now you are faced with 2-back run scenarios, okay? So now you're faced with 2-back run scenarios. So what happens from this spread formation to a boxing team is if those ends box the ball back to the mic and it's 6-on-6, if everybody gets blocked, that thing's going to rip. Okay, because now you don't have extra hats and your falling guys are a lot further away. So a lot of times now you'll get people that spill, and the reason they spill is at least they know if there's 6 blockers on 6 in the box, if an end comes and spills, now the ball can get sent wider to where maybe the mic can run past double teams or blocks, and then you have at least presence out on the perimeter with your strong safety and your will or your seam curl flat players, so that if you spill that ball, now that ball can get to help, because now in today's game we have to defend a lot of QB runs and a lot of spread formations. So it's the evolution of the game and the game on offense moving forward that forces defenses to move forward. So now what you see, all right, from that same structure in the evolution of defense, now what you see is you get the 3-4 defense, where now you still get those 3 down linemen, but instead you're going to get, all right, 4 linebackers. And now that you've got 4 linebackers in play, any one of these 4 backers can come to make the 4th guy in the rush. 2 of them can come and come with adjacent blitzes or adjacent zone pressures where, you know, obviously Mike and the Sam is one of the big ones right there, and you roll down behind it to America's blitz, so you got adjacent blitzes. But the 3-4 has put more athletic bodies on the field with 4 linebackers as opposed to the ends, and it has thrown in the uncertainty to the offense, because now you don't know where that 4th or 5th rusher is coming from. In the old days in the 5-2, you knew who the 5 rushers were. All right, pass protections weren't anywhere near as complicated as they need to be now. You knew who the 5 were that were coming, and you knew where they were coming from. They might game and twist a little bit here and there, but you knew the 5 hands in the ground were the 5 coming. Well, now with 3 hands in the ground and 8 people standing up, where people come from on defense, who's the 4th, 5th, or 6th rusher is now a lot more hard. It's a lot harder to tell, so your pass protections and your quarterback and your identifications have to be so much more advanced, all right, because of the 3-4 as opposed to the 5-2. So many of your 3-4 teams are playing old-fashioned 5-2 defense. They're just doing it, all right, with more athletic bodies, and they're doing it with more options in coverage so that they can also present more options in pressure, because you don't know which 5 are coming. All right, so whether it be, you know, you've got all different versions. You've got old school slant angle, so you've got old school Michigan slant angle type stuff where they all slant, and maybe the 4th comes from a side, they roll down and play 3 deep. Okay, you've got NFL style 2-gap players where these defensive linemen are playing 2 gaps up front, and what that means is they're playing 2 gaps based on the run block of the offense of linemen. I think sometimes when you hear two-gap and you see these big, massive bodies in the NFL, I think a lot of people think that they want that nose or that end, that two gaps, to put his arms out and play both gaps. That's really not what that means. What it means is he will two-gap based on the block that he sees. All right, so this nose will play both A-gaps, and usually the easiest way for the two-gap nose is play behind the head of the center. So when the center goes front side, the nose is now going to play the backside A-gap. He's not going to play both A-gaps. All right, even though the big Vince Wilforks and those bodies, their body is enough to occupy space in there, but really what he's doing is playing more of the backside A-gap behind that, so now the will can run over to the front side A-gap, and then if you were getting, you know, maybe like a stretch scheme or something like this where it was working here, now when the end gets that stretch block, he'll play behind it in the B-gap, all right, and now maybe your Mike can run over the top to the C, and then your Sam sets the edge depending on the defensive structure, but that's kind of how a two-gap scheme would work into 3-4, and the reason that's more successful in the NFL is because the linebackers are a little bit more athletic and they have more time in the scheme to understand how to fit, because they have to fit based on what the D linemen do, and if the D lineman is fitting two different gaps, then the linebackers behind them have to understand where the D linemen are fitting, and it makes it a little bit more complicated and for high school, junior high school, or lower level teams. Easiest thing if you wanted to try this scheme at the high school level is tell your linebackers to fit open windows and scrape closed doors and not worry about really so much the scheme or how the end's playing it. So your Mike linebacker, if he gets that stretch scheme, when he goes to run, if his end is a body and there's color in the B gap, then there's no sense plugging, keep running. All right? If for whatever reason he got a scheme where the tackle blocked down and his end was outside of that, okay, if it's going to be a gap exchange, he might still be able to run. But if it was, you know, if it was some type of scheme where the end was out here in the C gap, then your Mike would plug an ISO or something else that was coming, even though he wouldn't get ISO if there was a down block here. But let's just say it was a blast play with a down block and a fullback lead, and the end stayed outside of it. Your Mike sees that picture and he plugs because he fits open windows and he scrapes closed doors. All right, but in my opinion, shaded one-gap football in high school is a lot easier to define your fits for your linebackers, and it takes less athletic linebackers and less vision and thinking on the linebacker's part, in my opinion. But two-gap it is a great way to go because it defends a lot of different schemes based on you're giving a D lineman the ability to play a scheme based on the block that they get, not asking them to play, all right, one gap per se. It gives them a little bit more freedom. So some of the D linemen like that a little bit to get a little bit more freedom on that stretch play rather than having to run that reach block. They can penetrate backside of that and make some plays. It allows your D lineman to make a few more plays, in my opinion, which they like because they're not always eating up blocks and spilling the ball to other people. All right, so the evolution of football has gone from the old 5-2 boxing defense, all right, to where now it's a 3-4 defense, which is similar in structure to the 5-2. You're just doing it with different people, okay? In my opinion, remember now, if you're a box team, all right, you're trying to keep that ball inside. If you're a spill team, you're trying to get that ball to go outside, all right? Both of these are fine ways to play football, and there are good defensive teams who do both, one or the other, okay? Not everybody spills, not everybody boxes. Some teams do both. I would say today you see more spill teams just because of the nature of what we have to defend in today's game, but you still are some teams out there that box. You just have to understand, all right, that the term run fits is very important in football, okay? Because everyone has to be on the same page if you want to be good on defense. If you are boxing, that is fine. Teach everybody how you're going to fit runs in a box scheme. All right, make sure your fold or your overlap players, your apex defenders, whoever it is, make sure they understand how to fit runs in a box scheme. Make sure you know how to play option in a box scheme. Okay, make sure everybody knows their responsibilities in a box scheme. If you're going to be a spill team, that's fine too. Just make sure everybody understands how to fit those runs if you're going to be a spill team. If you're a spill team, your inside backers are going to run a little bit more. If you're a box team, your inside backers are going to plug a little bit more. All right, so as long as you understand how you fit runs, all right, and everybody's run fits the same on your defense, you can play good defense. It really doesn't matter. That's the great thing about football is on offense and defense, there's so many different ways to attack that it really doesn't matter. It keeps the game moving forward all the time because no two teams are the same. No two offenses and defenses are the same. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities in structure and 4-2-5 teams and 3-4 teams and spread teams and you know, now RPO or up-tempo teams. Yes, there's a lot of similarities in the nature of what they do, all right, but there are no two teams that are the same. There's people who block the power play a little bit different, the counter play a little bit different. There's people who use two linemen on counter plays. There's people who use a guard and a sniffer on counter plays. There's people who use a tight end as a hybrid sniffer, fullback, tight end. There's so many different ways to attack and defend in the game of football. That's what keeps it so fresh in everybody's mind. It's always changing, and as it changes, each side of the ball has to keep up with the other side of the ball. So in today's game, you know, it's older now, it's not new anymore, but the zone blitz craze is really old-fashioned 5-2 football. All right, they were voiding out zones 50, 60, 70 years ago, but no, the reason they were voiding out zones is because the ball didn't go there in the passing game, so that they could get away with voiding out zones. The zone blitz came about because they wanted to send 5, not play man-free, play zone integrity, but at the same time you had to be able to match up some of the routes that you're getting in zone blitzes, because in the NFL game with the evolution of the forward passing game and multiple receivers getting out into routes, you couldn't just void areas out anymore. All right, so the game always comes and goes in a full circle. It goes back to some old ideas, comes to some new ideas. Bottom line is you have to be able to change. You have to understand why you're changing. You need to know what you're doing on your side and how to defend what they're doing on their side. Okay, so the more you go back and kind of study the history of football and you understand a little bit more about the game of football itself, the better you'll understand why things were done a certain way, why they're not done that way anymore, why things that are done today are offshoots of things that were done 40, 50 years ago. I hope this video helps. All right, I appreciate the comment and the message on the YouTube channel. Anybody else that wants to see anything, I know there's a couple others of, there's some other messages I got the last 2 days about things they'd like to see. If there's anything else you'd like to see, give me a shout on the channel, leave a message or leave a comment, and if I can get back to them, I'll get back to them whenever I can and do those videos whenever I can. I appreciate the support. Thanks for watching. As always, guys, remember, you won't play well until you play fast. See you next time.